Elixir School. Documentation. Documenting Elixir code. Annotation. How much we comment and what makes quality documentation remains a contentious issue within the programming world. However, we can all agree that documentation is important for ourselves and those working with our code base. Elixir treats documentation as a first-class citizen, offering various functions to access and generate documentation for your projects. The Elixir code provides us with many different attributes to annotate a code base. Let's look at 3 ways. Pound for inline documentation, @module_doc for module level documentation, @doc for function level documentation. Inline documentation. Probably the simplest way to comment your code is with inline comments. Similar to Ruby or Python, Elixir's inline comment is denoted with a pound, frequently known as pound or hash, depending on where you are from in the world. Take this Elixir script. Outputs, hello chum. Elixir, when running this script, will ignore everything from the pound to the end of the line, treating it as throwaway data. It may add no value to the operation or performance of the script. However, when it's not so obvious what is happening, a programmer should know from reading your comment. Be mindful not to abuse the single line comment. Littering a codebase could become an unwelcome nightmare for some. It is best used in moderation. Documenting modules. The module doc annotator allows for inline documentation at a module level. It typically sits under the def module declaration at the top of a file. The below example shows a one-line comment within the module doc decorator. We, or others, can access this module documentation using the helper function within IEX. Module. Documenting functions. Just as Elixir gives us the ability for module level documentation, it also enables similar annotations for documenting functions. The @doc annotator allows for inline documentation at a function level. The @doc annotator sits just above the function it is annotating. If we kick into IEX again and use the helper command H on the function prepended with the module name, we should now see the following. Notice how you can use markup within our documentation and the terminal will render it. Apart from being really cool and a novel addition to Elixir's vast ecosystem, it gets much more interesting when we look at xdoc to generate HTML documentation on the fly. Note the @spec annotation is used to statically analyze code. To learn more about it, check out the Specifications and Types lesson. Xdoc. Xdoc is an official Elixir project that can be found on GitHub. It produces HTML and online documentation for our Elixir projects. First, let's create a mix project for our application. Mix, new, greet everyone. Now copy and paste the code from the @doc annotator lesson into a file called libgreeter, and make sure everything is still working from the command line. Now that we are working within a mix project, we need to start IEX a little differently using the IEX S flag mix command sequence. Installing. Assuming all is well and we're seeing the output above, we're now ready to set up Xdoc. In the mix.exs file, add the 2 required dependencies to get started, earmark and Xdoc. We specify only dev key value pair, as we don't want to download and compile these dependencies in a production environment. But why Earmark? Earmark is a markdown parser for the Elixir programming language that Xdoc utilizes to turn its documentation within app module doc and doc to beautiful looking HTML. It is worth noting at this point that you are not forced to use Earmark. You can change the markup tool to others such as Pandoc, Hoedown, or CMark. However, you will need to do a little more configuration, which you can read about here. For this tutorial, we'll just stick with Earmark. Generating documentation. Carrying on, from the command line, run the following two commands. Mix depskit, mix docs. If everything went to plan, you should see a similar message as to the output message in the above example. Let's now look inside our mix project, and we should see that there is another directory called doc. Inside is our generated documentation. If we visit the index page in our browser, we should see the following. We can see that Earmark has rendered our markdown, and Xdoc is now displaying it in a useful format. We can now deploy this to GitHub, our own website, or more commonly, hex docs. Best practice. Adding documentation should be added within the best practices guidelines of the language. Since Elixir is a fairly young language, many standards are still to be discovered as the ecosystem grows. The community, however, tried to establish best practices. To read more about the best practices, see the Elixir Style Guide. Always document a module. If you do not intend to document a module, do not leave it blank. Consider annotating the module false, like so. When referring to functions within module documentation, use backticks, like so. Separate any and all code one line under the module doc, as so. Use Markdown within docs. It will make it easier to read either via IEX or Xdoc. Try to include some code examples in your documentation. This allows you to generate automatic tests from the code examples found in a module, function, macro with xunit doctest, or macro with xunit doctest. In order to do that, you need to invoke the doctest1 macro from your test case and write your examples according to some guidelines as detailed in the official documentation. Let's check that out. Xunit doctest implements functionality similar to Python's doctest. It allows us to generate tests from the code examples in a module function macros documentation. To do this, we invoke the doctest macro from within your test case to ensure your code examples are written according to the syntax and guidelines below. All right, be right back.